Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we are 7 weeks going into 8 weeks without a state budget. What's all that about? And Senator Specter, wow, did he have at least one provocative and lively town hall meeting, plus our popular financial literacy update. All of that and more after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back. Well, in the studio with me to chat about Senator Specter, what a week for him, and as well the state budget. Where does all that stand? Are two veteran and I think two of the leading reporters in the state of Pennsylvania. Sitting across from me is Pete DeCoursey with Capitolwire, CapitolWire.com. Get on there, look at that, try it a bit. You're going to find you might like it. And Robert Swift, he's the Capitol reporter for Times-Shamrock newspapers. I finally got that right. I ought to, since I do your polls. All right, Peter, I'm going to start with you. Senator Specter in Lebanon, he did as usual. You get so many questions. He goes around, you put your hand up, he calls on you. 30 questions, two of them maybe a little raucous. In the end, I thought Senator Specter did pretty well in that event. What do you think?
I thought he did well, but I think people are used to more sedate affairs. Most congressmen and most senators, when you go around and have these town halls, you have a couple of wingnuts, you have a couple of sincere people, you have a couple of ideological people. But there was a tone of tension and anger because right now the Republican Party is trying to figure out how it can consider Barack Obama legitimate. See, Democrats back at this point in 2001 had it easy because there were questions that some raised about whether or not Bush had actually won the popular vote, whether he actually deserved to win the electoral vote. Right now, there are no such questions with Obama. He got 55% of the popular vote. He won the electoral vote easily. So now you have to raise questions about his birth certificate. What there is now is a permanent 45% of the population that if they're not, if their guy isn't in, just gets very angry, and the most avid of those people turn up at meetings, and they change the level of the discourse.
That's true, but the point is, I mean, my point is that this is very personal. Healthcare is a matter that everybody, it's near and dear to everybody's heart. Robert Specter, you know, had a shout down one or two people, but I thought overall he stood there, he gave his answers. Most of the time they were respectful to him. I watched it. It was on all three cable. It was a big deal, Peter, nationally. What was your sense of this? Peter makes a good point about how there is this permanent opposition that now has come to exist.
I think he was showing, you know, how to do it. He was getting down right into the well with the people, but not being, he was smiling as they talked to him, and he was answering them. Also, I find that we know Specter gets around the state, goes to all the counties. I find his decision to do one in Lebanon County interesting. It's a Republican county.
And he's got to win a Democratic primary,
right? But maybe he knew he'd go in there and get challenged, and maybe that would buck up his Democratic credentials.
So I think Robert's right. If you look at where he's been going to the places he needs to make an impression at. Philadelphia, Lebanon, he's done a couple out west. These are places, and again, being yelled at Lebanon for standing by Barack Obama is exactly what he needs right now.
But they did get some interesting concessions here, you know, that he'll look at a public health care plan, but, you know, none of this end-of-life decisions and, you know, how controversial that is about what kind of treatment you get. And you know, and as Peter points out, I mean, these lines are very, very hard right now, particularly on this health care plan. And some have accused the senator of not knowing what was in the House bill. Now, he says, you know, we haven't gotten it over there yet. But bottom line here, before we run to a break, and I want to come back, we're going to get into the budget.
Remember, none of his questioners knew exactly what was in the House bill either.
Yeah, okay, but
there are like 3 aides in Washington who know what's in that bill.
Is Specter better off for doing these town halls in face of the criticism politically or not?
Absolutely better off.
I think better off? Yes, he does, because he knows how to do them. He's not sitting there with his hand in his head in his hands like a Democratic congressman in Arkansas was.
He's one of those guys like Wendell who can take the guff, and what people remember is that he took it like a man. It only hurts you if they drive you from the field. Well, nobody has ever driven Arlen Specter off the field.
That's true. Good point. All right, the budget, where are we with it? We got two of the state's leading reporters are going to fill us in on where it stands and if there's an end in sight. All of that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back. Well, the budget debate continues to go on in Harrisburg. Most of the state employees have been paid now. The problems have percolated down to the counties and social service units and municipalities and school districts. Peter DeCoursey, is there any end in sight? Is there any end in sight of this budget mess?
No, the governor and the Democrats have gone back to wanting to go line by line through the various budgets and talk about how much better the high-spending budget that they're proposing is than the low-spending budget the Republicans are proposing is. And right now, I mean, we may not even get that process started, and that process isn't going to get us anywhere. Basically,
you mean going through 700 budget item lines isn't going to get them anywhere?
We're going to end up where we are now. The Republicans think you ought to spend $1 billion less than the governor thinks you ought to spend.
Now, how can
and the governor is going around the state talking about all the cool things you can do with an extra $1 billion.
Yeah, but Robert, look, $1 billion, I know it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But in a state where so much is fungible, where you've got pools of money, where there are some niche taxes that they might, is this really just about these numbers? Is it really just about $1 billion?
No, it's about ideology. It's about the 2010 election. It's about the looking towards the next governor coming in that election, who's going to be elected. And it's also that they chose to make their stand this year instead of a year next year when they're all up, most are up for re-election.
Well, the problem is, Terry, you can only use the one-term fundings and the tricks for 1 year, which means then they'd have to raise taxes next year. What these Republicans are trying to do, and it may or may not work, is to pass a budget this year that doesn't necessitate you raising taxes this year or next year or the year after that. Now, when you're $3 billion in the hole, the only way you can do that is to go for an extremely strict fiscal budget. And this is a state that has not seen extremely strict fiscal budgets. And the way they're trying to do this is to really pull back on a lot of Rendell's major programs.
But let me ask you this, Robert. I mean, there's I won't say rumors, but sources in Harrisburg keep saying that maybe the Republicans are up to a little political trick here, which is to force the Democrats to take the lead in an even larger income tax next year. To go back to your argument about the 2000, and you've heard that as well. Certainly nothing, there's no secret about this. Is it, or couldn't you have both general tax hikes and, Robert, larger programmatic cuts next year if, in fact, they just get through this year, you know, without big program cuts and without a general income tax hike? Or the
closer you push these votes for this year towards December, that's when people decide whether they're going to challenge an incumbent lawmaker or not. So you're pushing that vote closer to that period. Also, for the Republicans, there is a defensive mode in the Senate, at least. They have a large number of senators in the southeast area, which has been trending Democrat, who are up for re-election next year. I mean, I was surprised how many were in that even-numbered seat category, which is the seats on the ballot for the Senate. And so they're playing defense on that, and then trying to, you know, I think trying to push any tax vote, you know.
We're going to go to a break, but when we come back, I want to ask you, I want you to identify what you think are the key issues and problems that separate the two sides. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back with Pete DeCoursey and Robert Swift. Both are journalists in the Capitol, cover a lot of Capitol events and state politics. Peter, let me go to you. If you were to just mention 3 or 4 of the sticking points, go through them. Give our viewers some sense about where this stands. I mean, what are the problems that you think exist?
2/3 of the $1 billion gap is just education, especially basic education and early childhood education.
Right.
Then most of the rest of that 2/3 of the gap, a third of the gap, is welfare health care spending. The fact is, what Republicans would like to do is to ratchet down the number of poor people that we put on health care, both adults and children, and not expand further. What Rendell wants to do is to continue to expand those programs and to fund early childhood very aggressively. And what the Republicans want to do is to cut the early childhood funding basically in half. Now, Rendell is very much against that. Now, that's only, the early childhood piece is only $90 million or so, the $100 million. The K-12 basic education piece is $300 million, the new state funding he wants there.
Okay.
And there's about $200 million in welfare health care for the poor.
All right, so now you've identified the programmatic differences. Talk about the tax differences. How to pay. If indeed Rendell wants to have this spending, where is the money going to come from?
On the tax side, the idea is that we're going to have a broad-based tax. There's 3 major taxes that the state gets revenue from. The income tax has been taken off the table. You're starting to hear more about a state sales tax, base expansion of cover more items that could be taxed. The Senate Republicans, on the other hand, that's one of their principles, no broad-based tax increase.
But would they support some niche taxes, Marcellus Shale, the smokeless tobacco? I mean, you think, just one-word answer, do you think they're still viable? Are those taxes viable in the Capitol as we sit here now?
I would think the smokeless tobacco, at least, would be. I'm not
are they viable?
Argument.
Yes, but only if the spend number is down. If Rendell proposes to do small taxes for a low spend to make it more sustainable, they'll be yes. But if Rendell wants to do a whole bunch of one-time and small taxes,
We only have a few seconds. Philadelphia wants a 1% sales tax hike and some help assistance on its pension. There are hearings. This is interesting. Hearings on that subject at the end of the process. Don't you normally have the hearings at the beginning? Is this just more delay? Is this negotiations? Give me a 15-second answer.
The Senate's given a timetable with more delay. It reminds me of what the Senate did with the House passed sales tax proposal 3 years ago.
Peter, normally at the beginning of the process, you covered these hearings. Now we're at the end and they're holding hearings. What's that about?
They want to make sure there isn't anything hidden in this proposed legislation that will come back to bite them.
So do the Senate Republicans want to use Philadelphia as a pawn in the negotiations process to get what they want out of Rendell?
Yes, but the timing may not work for them, and which they've suddenly realized, which is why we started this 2-week process, because they realize they may have to do something to Philadelphia before.
I'm keeping you on here a little. All right. When does this budget get settled by Labor Day? Yes or no?
No.
In your estimation?
No.
Uh-oh, there you have it. All right, the popular financial literacy update with our friends from the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association coming up.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy. And by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, Financial Literacy Update Time. Joining me as often as the case is Michael Wishnow. He's a Senior Vice President with the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. And Keith Welks, he's with the department? Is it the State Treasurer's Office? He's the top deputy. One of how many deputies?
Wait. Let's
not
lose our heads too early in the program.
How many deputies do you have over there?
We have four. And
four.
They all think they're top deputies.
And you're one of. Well, I know your boss. He's doing a great job, by the way. Was that a commercial? At any rate, here's the situation, Keith. Payroll processing, about 78,000 people. Got their. Where does that all stand? State employees went without pay, half pay, some no pay. How does all that stand?
Well, I think we're happy to be able to say, Terry, that most of those people have gotten all the back pay they're entitled to. We have four more organizational elements that require special appropriations. I think that General Assembly is going to take care of that today, and we're going to get those people their pay as quickly as we can as well. I think we had a happy ending. We had a lot of people at Treasury who worked real hard. Great cooperation from the folks at the Rendell administration.
Right.
It was a tragedy that people were denied their pay any period of time, but we bobtailed it as much as we could at the end.
Good point. I'm glad to see that. I mean, we all agree this should never have happened. I won't go there with you guys on that. It's a special thing that I've talked a lot about. But good job. Thanks. I'm sure the citizens of our state appreciate that because they overwhelmingly wanted those people paid. Good job.
Thanks.
All right. Michael, we're here to talk about the Better Choice program. First of all, for our viewers, what is it?
Better Choice is a credit union program statewide developed with the State Treasurer's Office, also with the State Department of Banking support. And what it is it's an alternative to traditional payday lending. The traditional payday lenders charge, frankly, an arm and a leg and maybe a foot for a short-term loan. This is a short-term loan at a much lower rate with a required savings component and a financial counseling / coaching component.
Now, that part of it, I think, is pretty important. I mean, obviously, it's important. If people need the money and they're borrowing money, Treasurer, look, Keith, they've got to understand that there are risks at borrowing and getting all of that seems to me should be tied together.
It should be, and it is. We were very excited to be able to pull this program together with the Credit Union Association and build in some elements that are essentially unique in the country. As you said, Treasurer McCord is my boss, and I know that his interests are helping both.
On this show, by the way. Go ahead.
We'll get him on the show as soon as we can.
On, too.
I know.
Go ahead.
His goals are to preserve assets and promote prosperity, both for Pennsylvania and for Pennsylvanians, and helping people who need short-term loans understand how they might be able to manage their budgets better, introduce them to savings discipline, gets us to those goals, and Better Choice is a great program.
Well, what about let's talk about a little bit about the results. What have the results been now? First of all, how long? Remind me again.
Yeah, we've been at this now about 2.5 years.
I was going to say, it's been over 2 years.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It was about a year in the making. We rolled it out 2.5 years ago. It's slowly but surely been picking up momentum.
Good.
Thanks to Treasury and their championship of the program and helping us to get the word out. We've made more than 20,000 loans at this point, totaling almost $9.5 million. And that's resulted in savings to consumers of $6.7 million over what they would have paid had they used a payday lender.
Wow, that's I noticed that 82 credit unions now participate. Is this pretty much geographically dispersed around the state?
It really is. We have a great statewide footprint. We have credit unions up in Erie, down to Philly, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pittsburgh, all points in between.
Yeah. Before we talk about where this program might go, what's the general, either one of you can jump in, what's the general situation with payday lending? I mean, it's got such a bad rap. In some cases, I think deservedly so because of what we would call usurious interest rates. Are you finding in your office any new updates, or is it still, particularly in these hard times?
The Department of Banking in Pennsylvania has continued to be very aggressive in trying to clamp down. It's had some recent court victories. So I think the climate for payday lenders is changing. But you're absolutely right. As the economic downturn continues, more and more people are going to turn in that direction, and there'll always be a need for short-term loans.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's nothing certainly inherently wrong. I mean, I would imagine that a lot of, we do know because the media, particularly in central Pennsylvania, but in other parts of the state as well, were into the state employees and, making mortgage payments and car payments and worrying about getting the kids off to college. I mean, this was not a little matter for those folks.
Well,
and you go ahead.
I think that's absolutely true. But as Keith said, there is a need for the small dollar loan. The question is, how can you provide it in a fair manner to consumers, and in such a way that consumers are able to begin to save and begin to move into a more mainstream financial arrangement where they don't need that short-term loan.
All right, let's talk about where this all goes. I mean, you know, you've got the program in place. What are your plans, both the credit unions and the Treasurer's office, to work together? And then how much expansion do you think you can do, either one of you? You want to start with where you think this goes?
Sure. We worked with the Credit Union Association to create this program in order to bring some level of stability in lending practices to consumers' small dollar amounts.
Right.
If you take the notion of preserving assets and building towards prosperity, the next logical step is who might actually start taking out small dollar loans to use them for commercial purposes, to grow a business, an electrician or a carpenter who needs a $10,000 loan for a truck to get to work site, someone who wants to start a daycare center in his or her home.
And we know, for example, the engine of job growth is small business.
Right.
75% of the new jobs are created.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Thanks. I'm sorry. So we see the possibility of taking the ideas we've ground truthed with credit union in Better Choice and moving into micro lending and some microfinance opportunities. Especially as the economy turns around, you'll see a burst of entrepreneurship in smaller businesses. People saying, now there is an opportunity. If I only had $10,000 or $15,000, I could actually start to make some money for my family. So that's where we want to push forward.
Okay. And from your perspective?
Well, and we've been talking about this topic with the State Treasurer's Office, as well as a number of other interested parties, Small Business Administration, Small Business Development Centers, a couple of the universities. Our credit unions have been doing these microfinance loans. They just haven't necessarily been identifying them as such. So the question is, how do we put together a program for folks that want to start a new business, that maybe don't have a lot of assets, and that maybe need some coaching on the small business side? Can we put together a group of folks, including Treasury, including our credit unions, that can help folks to sort of realize their American dream from an entrepreneurial spirit?
All right, we're out of time. This is a great financial update. Good job. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, you all stay well.